The conference room fell silent as Mrs. Victoria Okafor, once the most feared teacher at Bright Future Secondary School, stood frozen before a mahogany table. Her hands trembled as she clutched a termination letter. Across from her sat a figure she hadn't seen in over a decade, a man in an expensive suit, his eyes calm but resolute. "Do you remember me, Mrs. Okafor?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years. "You once told me I would amount to nothing because my uniform was torn and my shoes had holes. You said poor children like me had no business dreaming." Victoria's face went pale as recognition dawned. The boy she had humiliated, mocked and nearly destroyed was now Dr. Kelechi Anozie, Nigeria's youngest Minister of Education, and he held her career in his hands. "Please," he whispered, her arrogance finally crumbling. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never cared to know," he replied. But this story didn't start here. It started 10 years ago, in your classroom, with a boy who believed education could change his life. Welcome to Raw Tales. I am your storyteller, and today I bring you a story that will shake you to your core. Before we dive in, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up. It truly means the world to me and helps me bring you more powerful stories like this one. Now, brace yourself for a tale of injustice, perseverance, and the ultimate reversal of fortune. This is a story of how karma found its way back to someone who thought they were untouchable. 10 years earlier, in the bustling city of Lagos, 12-year-old Kelechi Anozie walked barefoot down the dusty road to Bright Future Secondary School. His uniform, though carefully patched by his mother's loving hands, bore the unmistakable signs of poverty: faded fabric, missing buttons, and tears held together by prayer and determination. Kelechi lived with his mother, Mama Anozie, in a small room behind Mr. Taiwo's provision store in Mushi. His father had died in a motor accident when Kelechi was 8, leaving behind nothing but debts and dreams. Mama Anozie worked as a cleaner at the local hospital during the day and sold akara by the roadside every evening. Her calloused hands, testament to her endless struggle to keep her son in school. "Education is the only inheritance I can give you," she would tell Kelechi every morning, straightening his one collar with tears in her eyes. "No matter what they say, no matter how they treat you, never give up on your books. They cannot take knowledge from your head." Despite their circumstances, Kelechi was brilliant. His teachers at the primary level had called him exceptional, a natural leader with an insatiable hunger for learning. He devoured every book he could find, studying by candlelight when the electricity was cut off, which was often. His notebooks, bought with money saved from skipping meals, were filled with neat handwriting and ambitious dreams. At Bright Future Secondary School, Kelechi excelled in every subject. While other students struggled with mathematics, he solved complex equations with ease. His essays in English were poetry, his scientific experiments innovative. Yet, none of this mattered to Mrs. Victoria Okafor, his school's senior English teacher and deputy principal. Mrs. Okafor was a woman who believed in social hierarchy. Born into a wealthy family, married to a successful businessman, she drove to school in a Mercedes-Benz and wore designer clothes that cost more than most teachers' monthly salaries. She had never known hunger, never felt the sting of rejection based on poverty, never understood that brilliance could emerge from the most unlikely places. To her, students were divided into categories: those worth investing in, who came from good families with money and connections, and those who were merely occupying space until they inevitably dropped out to become mechanics, traders, or worse. Kelechi, with his patched uniform and worn-out sandals, clearly belonged to the latter category. It was a Tuesday morning in March when the first major incident occurred. Kelechi had stayed up all night finishing his English essay on the role of education in national development. He had poured his heart into those papers, writing about how education could lift entire communities out of poverty, how one enlightened mind could transform a nation. As students filed into Mrs. Okafor's classroom, whispers and giggles erupted. Kelechi's uniform had torn at the shoulder seam that morning when he helped his mother carry heavy buckets of water. Mama Anozie had quickly stitched it with white thread, the only color she had, creating a visible patch that stood out against the faded blue fabric. Well, 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 Mrs. Okafor's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. What do we have here? Kelechi Anozie, I see you have decided to turn my classroom into a fashion show for beggars. The class erupted in laughter. Some students, particularly those from wealthy homes who formed Mrs. Okafor's inner circle, pointed and whispered. Others looked uncomfortable but remained silent, afraid to challenge the teacher's authority. Kelechi stood quietly by his desk, his essay clutched in his hands. He had worked so hard on it, staying up while his mother slept. Writing by the dim light of a kerosene lamp, his excitement about sharing his ideas had sustained him through the long night. Mrs. Okafor, he said respectfully, I have completed the assignment. May I submit my essay? She looked at him with undisguised disgust. Essay? From you? Child, before you start dreaming about changing the world through education, perhaps you should ask your mother to learn how to properly mend clothes. How can someone who cannot even dress himself properly have anything meaningful to say about education? The words hit Kelechi like physical blows. His mother had spent her lunch money on thread to fix his uniform. She had worked her fingers raw to keep him in school, and now her efforts were being mocked by the very person who should have encouraged his academic pursuits. Ma, I worked very hard on this essay, Kelechi persisted, his voice steady despite the humiliation. I researched extensively and included examples from other African countries that have developed through education. Mrs. Okafor snatched the papers from his hands, her eyes scanning through the neatly written pages with growing irritation. The essay was exceptional, well researched, eloquently written, and filled with innovative ideas. But rather than praise, it only fueled her resentment. Listen carefully, boy, she said, her voice loud enough for the entire class to hear. Education is for those who can afford it, who have the background to understand it, who come from families that value it. You think because you can string together a few big words, you are going somewhere? Look at yourself. Look at your clothes, your shoes, your entire existence. This is where you belong, and this is where you will stay. She tore his essay in half, then in quarters, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like dead leaves. Don't waste my time with your ridiculous dreams. Focus on learning a trade. Maybe your mother can find you an apprenticeship with a mechanic or a carpenter. That's more your level. Kelechi watched his hard work, his hopes, his dreams, his sleepless nights scattered on the classroom floor. But he didn't cry. He didn't shout. He simply bent down, gathered every piece of his torn essay and placed them carefully in his school bag. Yes, ma, he said quietly, his voice betraying none of the fire that now burned in his heart. The class resumed, but Kelechi spent the rest of the period staring out the window, his mind not on grammar or literature, but on a promise he made to himself in that moment. He would prove her wrong, not for revenge, not for vindication, but because his mother deserved better than to have her sacrifices mocked by someone who had never known struggle. The humiliation in Mrs. Okafor's classroom was just the beginning. Over the following months, what started as casual cruelty evolved into systematic persecution. Every day brought new torment, new ways for her to remind Kelechi and everyone else of his place in a carefully constructed social hierarchy. During the next English class, Mrs. Okafor implemented a seating arrangement that placed students according to their family's financial status. The children of doctors, lawyers, and businessmen sat in the front rows, while those from modest backgrounds were relegated to the middle. Kelechi, whom she now referred to as the scholarship case, despite him paying his own school fees through his mother's sacrifices, was assigned to the back corner, near the broken desks and cracked windows. This is how the real world works, she announced to the class. Those who have resources get the best opportunities. Those who don't must accept their limitations. It is better you learn this now than have unrealistic expectations later. But if Mrs. Okafor thought this would break Kelechi's spirit, she was wrong. It turned his corner desk into a fortress of learning. While other students whispered and passed notes, he read voraciously. When the school's ancient textbooks fell apart, he copied entire chapters by hand. When the library's books were restricted to senior students only, he befriended the security guard, Uncle Joseph, who allowed him to study there during lunch breaks. Uncle Joseph, an elderly man who had worked at the school for 20 years, saw something special in Kelechi. That boy reminds me of myself when I was young, he told the other staff members. Poor but determined. Mark my words, he'll go far if given the chance. The second major incident occurred during the midterm examinations. Kelechi had prepared extensively, studying every subject with the intensity of someone who knew education was his only path to a better life. When the results were announced, he had scored the highest marks in the entire class, 98% in English, 97% in mathematics, 96% in sciences. Mrs. Okafor stared at the results with undisguised fury. How could this boy, this symbol of everything she deemed inferior, outperform the children of professors and politicians? There has to be an explanation, and she was determined to find it. Kelechi Anozie, she called out during the next class. Stand up. Kelechi rose from his corner desk, unsure of what was coming. Your examination results are interesting, she said, walking slowly around the classroom like a predator circling prey. Too interesting for someone of your background. Tell me, how exactly did you manage to score higher than students who have private tutors and home libraries? The implication was clear, and it hit Kelechi like a slap. She was accusing him of cheating. Ma, I studied very hard, he replied, his voice steady despite the humiliation of being questioned publicly. I can explain any answer I gave if you would like to verify. Oh, can you? Mrs. Okafor's voice dripped with sarcasm. How convenient. Tunde Adeleke, she called to one of her favorite students. the son of a wealthy banker. What did you score in mathematics? 85% ma, Tunde replied, shooting a sympathetic glance at Kelechi. 85%, and Tunde has been attending extra lessons with Professor Williams from the University of Lagos. His father pays 50,000 naira monthly for private tutoring. Yet, somehow, our scholarship boy has scored 97%. Fascinating. She walked to the blackboard and wrote a complex algebraic equation. Solve this, Kelechi. Let's see this brilliant mind at work. Kelechi approached the board calmly. The equation was challenging but not beyond his capabilities. He had encountered similar problems in the advanced mathematics books he borrowed from the public library. Within 5 minutes, he had solved it completely, showing each step clearly. The class watched in amazement. Even Tunde, who had been struggling with similar equations despite his expensive tutoring, looked impressed. Mrs. Okafor's expression grew darker. Lucky guess, she muttered. Anyone can memorize solutions. She wrote another problem, then another. Each time, Kelechi solved them flawlessly, his explanations clear and methodical. Finally, she threw down the chalk in frustration. Enough of this show-off display, she snapped. Even if you did solve these problems, it doesn't change what you are. You can memorize all the equations you want, but you can't memorize your way out of poverty. You can't calculate your way into respectability. The words hung in the air like poison. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some were beginning to see the injustice of the situation, but none dared speak up. Furthermore, Mrs. Okafor continued, her voice growing louder, I have decided to monitor your future examinations more closely. Someone of your background achieving such scores is suspicious. From now on, you will take your test under special supervision. The third incident came during the school's Cultural Day celebration. Each class was required to present a performance, and students were encouraged to showcase their talents. Kelechi had written a poem about education as the great equalizer, a piece that spoke to his own journey and dreams. He had practiced for weeks, memorizing every line, perfecting every gesture. The poem was titled The Power of Knowledge, and it began. In the darkness of ignorance I was born, but education lit a candle in my soul. They said my clothes were torn, but my mind remains whole. When it was time for performances, Mrs. Okafor was the judge. She watched with visible irritation as Kelechi delivered his poem with passion and eloquence. His words moved many in the audience to tears, including some teachers who began to see the injustice in his treatment. But when the results were announced, Kelechi's name was nowhere to be found among the winners. Instead, a mediocre dance performance by one of Mrs. Okafor's favorite students took first place. Kelechi, she called after the event, see me in my office. In the privacy of her office, surrounded by her certificates and awards, Mrs. Okafor delivered her cruelest blow yet. I want you to understand something clearly, she began, her voice cold and measured. Your little poetry performance today was adequate, but adequacy from someone like you is not enough. You seem to think that because you can read and write, you belong in the same category as these other children. You don't. She leaned forward, her eyes hard. Their parents are building this country. Their families have contributed to society for generations. They have legacy, heritage, influence. You have nothing but poverty. and dreams that will never come true. Kelechi stood silently, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on a point beyond her shoulder. I am going to save you years of disappointment, she continued. Drop out now. Find yourself a trade. Stop wasting everyone's time with these academic pretensions. You will never amount to anything significant in this life. Ma, Kelechi finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. May I ask you a question? Mrs. Okafor raised an eyebrow, surprised by his boldness. What if you are wrong? He asked simply. The question caught her off guard. For a moment, she was speechless. What if poverty is not a permanent condition? What if intelligence doesn't depend on bank accounts? What if someone like me could actually make a difference in this world? Mrs. Okafor's face flushed with anger. Get out of my office, she shouted. And don't you dare question me again, you ungrateful child. But as Kelechi walked out, his question lingered in the air like an unfinished symphony. For the first time, Mrs. Okafor felt a tiny seed of doubt, though she buried it immediately under layers of prejudice and pride. The breaking point came during the annual Parents' Day celebration. It was meant to be a joyous occasion where families gathered to celebrate their children's achievements. But for Kelechi, it became the deepest humiliation of his young life. Mama Anozie had worked double shifts for weeks to afford a new dress for the occasion. She wanted to look presentable when meeting her son's teachers, to show them that despite their poverty, they were dignified people who valued education. She arrived at the school wearing her Sunday best, a simple but clean Ankara dress and her only pair of good shoes, polished until they shone. The school compound was filled with expensive cars, parents in designer clothes, and an atmosphere of affluent celebration. Mama Anozie felt out of place, but held her head high, proud of her son's academic achievements. Mrs. Okafor was holding court near the main pavilion, surrounded by parents of her favorite students. She was in her element, discussing university applications and career prospects with people who shared her social circle. When Mama Anozie approached, hoping to discuss Kelechi's exceptional performance, the conversation gradually died down. Mrs. Okafor looked at her with barely concealed disdain. You must be Kelechi's mother, she said, her tone cordial but cold. Yes, ma, I am Mrs. Anozie, Kelechi's mother replied respectfully. I wanted to thank you for teaching my son. He speaks so highly of his education here. The other parents exchanged glances. Some looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension. Well, Mrs. Okafor said loudly, ensuring everyone could hear. I appreciate your gratitude, but I must be honest with you. Your son has unrealistic expectations about his future. Mama Anozie's smile faded slightly. Ma, what do you mean? I mean that sometimes, as parents, we must help our children understand their limitations. Kelechi is intelligent, yes, but intelligence alone is not enough. Success requires resources, connections, family background, things that, well, some families can provide and others cannot. The words hit Mama Anozie like a physical blow. She had sacrificed everything for her son's education, often going hungry so he could have school fees and books. Now, this woman was telling her it was all pointless. Ma, with respect, Mama Anozie said, her voice trembling but determined. My son is one of the best students in his class. He studies day and night. He dreams of becoming a doctor or a lawyer, maybe even a teacher like you. Surely, hard work counts for something. Mrs. Okafor laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. My dear woman, dreams are lovely, but reality is different. Look at you. Look at these other parents, doctors, engineers, business owners, politicians. Their children will go to the best universities, study abroad, take over family businesses, marry well. What can you offer your son? What connections do you have? What legacy are you leaving him? The circle of parents watched this public humiliation with varying degrees of discomfort. Some were clearly embarrassed by Mrs. Okafor's cruelty, but none spoke up. Perhaps Mrs. Okafor continued, warming to her theme. It will be kinder to help Kelechi understand that there are other paths in life, skilled labor, small trading businesses, technical work. These are respectable occupations for people of your circumstances. Mama Anozie's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. Ma, my son is brilliant. His teachers in primary school said he was exceptional. He loves learning. Love is not enough. Mrs. Okafor interrupted harshly. This is not a fairy tale where the poor boy becomes prince through studying hard. This is real life, where social structures exist for good reasons. I am trying to save your family years of disappointment. At that moment, Kelechi appeared, having been searching for his mother. He had heard the last part of the conversation and saw the tears his mother was fighting to hold back. His heart shattered, not for himself, but for the woman who had given everything for his dreams. Ah, Kelechi, Mrs. Okafor said, noticing his approach. Perfect timing. I was just explaining to your mother the importance of realistic expectations. Kelechi looked at his mother's face, at the humiliation in her eyes, at the way she had shrunk into herself under this public assault. Then he looked at Mrs. Okafor, surrounded by her circle of privileged allies, enjoying a moment of cruel superiority. Mama, let's go, he said quietly, taking his mother's arm. But Mrs. Okafor wasn't finished. Kelechi, before you leave, I want you to hear this clearly. Stop filling your mother's head with impossible dreams. Accept your place in life. Find a trade. Learn a skill. Be practical. Not everyone can be a doctor or a lawyer, and that is perfectly fine. Kelechi paused, his hand still supporting his mother. When he turned back to face Mrs. Okafor, his eyes held a depth that surprised even her. Mrs. Okafor, he said, his voice calm and clear, you speak about place as if it is assigned by birth and cannot be changed. But what if you are wrong? What if place is something we choose, not something chosen for us? Don't be ridiculous, she began. What if 10 years from now our positions were reversed? What if the boy you are dismissing today becomes the man who determines your tomorrow? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Okafor's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. How dare this child, this poor, insignificant child, speak to her this way in front of her peers? You insolent boy, she snapped. How dare you address me with such disrespect? This is exactly what I mean. Poverty breeds arrogance and delusion. But Kelechi had already turned away, gently guiding his crying mother toward the school gates. As they walked away, his mother whispered through her tears, I'm sorry, my son. I'm sorry I cannot give you what these other children have. Kelechi stopped walking and faced his mother, taking her hands in his. Mama, never apologize for who we are. You have given me something more valuable than money. You have given me strength, values, and the belief that knowledge can change everything. That woman can mock our clothes, our circumstances, even our dreams, but she cannot take away what is in here. She tapped his head. Or here, he touched his heart. As they left the school compound, neither mother nor son looked back. But if they had, they would have seen several parents shaking their heads in disgust at what they had witnessed, and a few teachers who had overheard the conversation beginning to question Mrs. Okafor's character. That night, Kelechi made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He would not just succeed, he would succeed so spectacularly that no child would ever have to endure what he had experienced in that classroom. Following the Parents' Day humiliation, something fundamental shifted in Kelechi's approach to his education. The hurt was still there, raw and deep, but it had transformed into something more powerful. Determination forged in the fires of injustice. He began to study with an intensity that bordered on obsession. While other students played football during break time, Kelechi read. While they gossiped about movies and music, he solved mathematical problems. His notebooks multiplied, filled with detailed notes, diagrams, and ideas that went far beyond the school curriculum. Mrs. Okafor, meanwhile, seemed energized by what she perceived as a victory. She had put the boy and his mother in their place, reminded everyone of the natural order of things. She became even more brazen in her favoritism, openly discussing university recommendations for her preferred students while completely ignoring Kelechi's academic achievements. But cracks were beginning to show in her carefully constructed world. Mr. Adebayo, the mathematics teacher, approached her one afternoon with Kelechi's latest test paper. "Victoria, you need to see this," he said, his voice filled with amazement. "This boy solved problems I didn't expect any of our students to handle. Look at this solution. It's not just correct, it is elegant, innovative even." Mrs. Okafor glanced at the paper dismissively. "Probably copied from somewhere. No, that is impossible. I created these problems myself, specifically for this test. Victoria, this boy is exceptional. We should be nurturing this talent, not what?" she interrupted sharply. Mr. Adebayo paused, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps we should reconsider how we evaluate students. Merit should count for something, regardless of background." Mrs. Okafor's eyes flashed dangerously. "Are you questioning my judgment, Samuel?" "I am questioning our methods," he replied boldly. "This boy has consistently outperformed every student in my classes. If we ignore talents like this, we are failing as educators." After Mr. Adebayo left, Mrs. Okafor sat alone in her office, staring at Kelechi's test paper. The solutions were indeed remarkable, creative, thorough, demonstrating a mathematical intuition that even she, with all her prejudices, could recognize as extraordinary. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. What if she was wrong about this boy? What if his intelligence was real, not just a fluke or some elaborate cheating scheme? But she quickly suppressed these thoughts. Admitting she was wrong would mean admitting that everything she believed about social hierarchy, about the relationship between wealth and worth was false. It would mean acknowledging that she had been cruel to a child who deserved encouragement, not condemnation. No, it was easier to maintain her position, to find new ways to explain away his success. The next day, she called Kelechi to her office. "I have been reviewing your recent performance," she began, her tone deceptively calm. "Your scores are unusual." Kelechi waited silently. "I have decided to recommend you for special academic counseling," she continued. "Sometimes, students who push themselves too hard, who have unrealistic goals, can experience psychological pressure that affects their judgment." Kelechi understood immediately. She was trying to frame his academic success as a mental health issue, to pathologize his achievements rather than acknowledge them. "Ma, I don't understand what you mean by unrealistic goals," he said carefully. "Kelechi, let me be direct. I know you have been telling people you want to study medicine or law at university. These are professional courses that require not just academic performance but social connections, family support, financial resources. They lead to careers that require a certain background." She leaned forward, her expression almost sympathetic. "I am trying to help you avoid crushing disappointment. Why not consider something more achievable? Teaching perhaps, or business studies, something that matches your circumstances." Kelechi looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Mrs. Okafor, with respect, my circumstances are not permanent. They are simply my starting point, not my destination." A sympathetic mask slipped. "Your starting point is your reality, boy. Stop living in fantasies." "What if you are wrong?" he asked again, the same question that had unsettled her months earlier. This time, her response was swift and brutal. "I am not wrong, and I am tired of your arrogance. Perhaps it is time your mother found you a different school, one more suited for your level." The threat was clear. She was considering having him expelled. That evening, Kelechi sat with his mother in their small room, sharing the day's events. Mama Anozie listened with growing anger and sadness. "Maybe she is right," she said finally, her voice breaking. "Maybe I have been selfish, keeping you in that school when we can't afford to fit in. Maybe you would be happier somewhere else, with children from families like ours." Kelechi took his mother's hands, looking directly into her eyes. "Mama, that woman is afraid," he said softly. "Afraid? Afraid of what?" "Afraid of being wrong. Afraid that someone like me might actually succeed. Because if I do, it means everything she believes about worth and value is false. She is not trying to protect me from disappointment. She is trying to protect herself from the possibility that she's been wrong all along." Mama Anozie studied her son's face, seeing a maturity and wisdom that belied his years. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I want to stay. I want to finish my education at that school, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. Because every day I spend there, every time I excel despite her attempts to break me, I am proving something important, not just to her, but to every child who will come after me." His mother nodded slowly, understanding. "Then we stay, whatever it costs us." Meanwhile, rumors were spreading throughout the school. Some parents who had witnessed the Parents' Day incident began talking among themselves. A few teachers started paying closer attention to the dynamics in Mrs. Okafor's classroom. Uncle Joseph, the security guard, mentioned to anyone who would listen that the school was making a terrible mistake in how they treated that brilliant boy. But Mrs. Okafor seemed oblivious to the shifting mood. She was planning what she saw as her final move, a recommendation to the school board that Kelechi be transferred to a more appropriate institution. She had the support of the principal, who trusted her judgment implicitly, and the backing of several influential parents who shared her views about maintaining social order. She scheduled a meeting for the following week, confident that she would finally be rid of the boy who had become an uncomfortable mirror reflecting her own prejudices and limitations. What she didn't know was that Mr. Adebayo had been documenting Kelechi's exceptional performance, and that every other teachers were beginning to question the school's treatment of their most talented students. A counter-narrative was forming, one that would soon collide with Mrs. Okafor's carefully constructed version of reality. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just Kelechi's future, but the moral direction of the entire school. 10 years had passed since that painful afternoon when a 12-year-old boy and his mother walked away from Bright Future Secondary School in humiliation. The world had turned, seasons had changed, and that boy had become a man whose story would soon intersect with his past in the most dramatic way possible. Dr. Kelechi Anozie adjusted his tie as his driver navigated through Lagos traffic toward the Ministry of Education headquarters. At 28, he was Nigeria's youngest ever Minister of Education, appointed after a stellar career that had taken him from scholarship student to Rhodes Scholar, from Oxford University to Harvard Business School, from development economist to policy maker. His rise had been meteoric, but earned through relentless hard work. After graduating as valedictorian from Bright Future Secondary School, despite Mrs. Okafor's attempts to derail him, he had won a full scholarship to study economics at the University of Lagos. His undergraduate thesis on education as economic empowerment in developing nations had been published internationally and caught the attention of Oxford University, who offered him a full scholarship for graduate studies. At Oxford, he had excelled beyond all expectations, earning dual degrees in development economics and education policy. His dissertation, Breaking the Poverty Cycle Through Educational Reform, became required reading in development study programs across Africa. Harvard Business School followed, where he specialized in public policy and international development. But Kelechi had never forgotten his roots or his purpose. Every achievement was dedicated to his mother, who had worked herself into an early grave to support his dreams, passing away just as he completed his doctoral studies. Her last words to him had been, "Make sure no child ever has to face what you faced." He had returned to Nigeria with a mission to transform the country's educational system from the inside out. His work with international development organizations, his innovative programs for educational equity, and his passionate advocacy for merit-based opportunities had caught the attention of the new president, who appointed him Minister of Education with a mandate to revolutionize Nigerian schools. Today's agenda included reviewing reports on school performance, teacher evaluations, and a particularly troubling case that had landed on his desk: multiple complaints about discriminatory practices at a school he knew all too well, Bright Future Secondary School. As his convoy approached the school, Kelechi felt the familiar tightness in his chest that has always accompanied visits to his educational past. He had visited many schools across Nigeria, but this was the first time he was returning to the place where his character had been forged in the fires of humiliation and determination. The complaints about the school were serious. Systematic discrimination against students from low-income families, nepotism in academic recognition, and most disturbing of all, reports of teachers actively discouraging talented students from pursuing higher education based on their socio-economic status. The name mentioned most frequently in these complaints was Mrs. Victoria Okafor, now the school's principal. As Kelechi's Mercedes pulled into the school compound, the same compound where his mother had been publicly humiliated, he noticed the changes. New buildings, fresh paint, manicured lawns. The school had clearly prospered over the past decades, but had its art changed? Mrs. Okafor stood at the entrance with her senior staff, resplendent in expensive lace and jewelry, her smile wide and welcoming. She had prepared for weeks for this visit, seeing it as an opportunity to showcase the school's high standards and perhaps secure additional government funding. "Your Excellency," she gushed as Kelechi stepped out of his car. "What an honor to have the Minister of Education visit our humble institution. We are so proud of the work we do here, maintaining the highest academic and social standards." Kelechi studied her face, noting how little she had changed. A bit older, perhaps more polished, but the same arrogant tilt to her chin, the same calculating look in her eyes as she assessed his expensive suit and official entourage. "Mrs. Okafor," he said simply, his voice professional but cool. "Please, Your Excellency, let me show you our facilities. We have made tremendous improvements since our founding. Our students come from the best families in Lagos, and we have maintained our reputation as a school for future leaders." As they walked through the corridors, Mrs. Okafor kept up a steady stream of commentary about the school's achievements, its prestigious alumni, its selective admission process that ensured the right caliber of students. Kelechi listened silently, his eyes taking in details that Mrs. Okafor couldn't see. The way certain students were treated differently, the subtle but unmistakable signs of the same social hierarchy that had nearly destroyed his own dreams. They entered a classroom where lesson was in progress. The teacher, a young woman who reminded Kelechi of himself at that age, was attempting to engage students in a discussion about Nigerian literature. But he noticed immediately how the seating arrangements mirrored the same discriminatory pattern he remembered. Wealthy students in front, others relegated to the back based on their family's social status. "Mrs. Okafor," Kelechi said quietly, "may I ask about your student placement policies?" "Of course, Your Excellency. We believe in creating an environment that reflects real-world hierarchies. It prepares our students for society's expectations." The casual cruelty of her words hit him like a physical blow. Nothing had changed. She was still the same woman who had torn up his essay, who had humiliated his mother, who had tried to crush his dreams under the weight of her prejudices. After the classroom tour, Mrs. Okafor led him to her office, the same office where she had once told him to find a trade and abandon his academic aspirations. The irony was not lost on Kelechi as he sat across from her, now holding the power to determine her professional future. "Your Excellency," she began, settling into her chair with the confidence of someone who believes herself untouchable. I hope you can see why Bright Future Secondary School deserves increased government support. We maintain standards that other schools simply cannot match. Tell me about these standards, Kelechi said, his voice deceptively calm. Well, we have a very selective admission process. We ensure that our students come from families that understand the value of education, families with resources to support academic excellence. We don't waste time with charity cases or students who lack the proper background for serious academic work. Each word was like a knife twisting in an old wound. Kelechi thought of all the brilliant children who had been denied opportunities because of this woman's narrow-minded prejudices. And what about students who show exceptional academic promise but come from modest backgrounds? He asked. Mrs. Okafor waved dismissively. Your Excellency, with respect, academic promise means little without proper support systems. These children often have unrealistic expectations. It is kinder to help them understand their limitations early, rather than let them waste years chasing impossible dreams. She leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, Minister, we had a student some years ago, brilliant test scores, always at the top of his class, but completely inappropriate for our environment. Poor family, torn uniforms, no social connections. I tried to counsel him toward more realistic goals, but he was impossibly arrogant. Thank goodness he eventually left. Students like that disrupt the harmony we work so hard to maintain. Kelechi felt his heart racing. She was talking about him, completely unaware that the charity case she had tried to destroy was now sitting across from her, holding her career in his hands. What happened to this student? He asked quietly. Oh, I have no idea. Probably learned a trade somewhere, I suppose. The important thing is that we maintain our standards and continue to serve students who truly belong here. The casual dismissal of his entire existence, the complete lack of curiosity about what had become of the boy she had tormented, revealed the depth of her callousness. She had never once wondered if she might have been wrong, never questioned whether her cruelty might have damaged a promising young life. Kelechi stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the school compound in the distance. He could see students playing during their break, some laughing together, others sitting alone, probably the ones deemed unworthy of inclusion in Mrs. Okafor's social hierarchy. Mrs. Okafor, he said, still facing the window, do you believe that a person's worth is determined by their family's wealth? She seemed surprised by the philosophical question. Well, Your Excellency, I believe in practical realities. Wealth often reflects intelligence, hard work, and good judgment passed down through generations. It is not the only factor, but it is certainly a significant indicator of a family's values and potential. And you believe that poor children are inherently less capable of academic excellence? Not incapable, perhaps, but limited by their circumstances. They lack the resources, the cultural background, the social connections necessary for true success. It is not their fault, but it is their reality. Kelechi turned slowly to face her, and for the first time since his arrival, he allowed his professional mask to slip slightly. Mrs. Okafor, I want to tell you a story about a boy who once attended this school. She settled back in her chair, clearly expecting some inspirational tale about overcoming adversity. This boy was 12 years old when he started here. His father had died in a motor accident, leaving his mother to work as a cleaner and food vendor to pay school fees. His uniform was patched, his shoes had holes, and he often went hungry so that his mother could afford his textbooks. Mrs. Okafor nodded politely, though her expression suggested she was wondering where this story was leading. Despite his circumstances, this boy was exceptionally intelligent. He scored the highest marks in every subject, wrote essays that demonstrated remarkable insight, and solved mathematical problems that challenged even the most privileged schools in his class. How inspiring, she murmured, though her tone suggested mild boredom. But there was a teacher at this school who couldn't see past his torn uniform and worn out shoes. This teacher repeatedly humiliated him in front of his classmates, tore up his carefully written assignments, and told him he would never amount to anything because of his poverty. Mrs. Okafor shifted uncomfortably, a vague recognition beginning to dawn in her eyes. This teacher told his mother, in front of other parents, that her son should abandon his academic dreams and learn a trade instead. She said that education was for people from good families with money and connections, not for someone of his background. The color began to drain from Mrs. Okafor's face. But this boy didn't give up. Despite the humiliation, despite the systematic attempts to break his spirit, he continued to excel. He graduated as valedictorian, won a full scholarship to university, earned graduate degrees from Oxford and Harvard, and dedicated his life to ensuring that no child would ever face the discrimination he had endured. Mrs. Okafor's hands began to tremble as the full realization hit her. That boy, Mrs. Okafor, was me. The words fell into silence like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through the room. Mrs. Okafor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her face cycling through disbelief, recognition, and growing horror. You are, she stammered, Kelechi Anozie, the charity case you tried so hard to destroy. The boy whose dream you dismissed as impossible fantasies. The students you said would never amount to anything. Mrs. Okafor's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. The successful, respected Minister of Education sitting in her office was the same boy she had tormented, the same child whose mother she had publicly humiliated, the same student whose potential she had willfully ignored. Your Excellency, I didn't know. I never meant. You never meant what, Mrs. Okafor? You never meant to crush a child's dreams? You never meant to tell a brilliant student that he was worthless because his clothes were patched? You never meant to make a mother cry because she couldn't afford designer uniforms for her son? Each question hit her like a physical blow. She tried to speak, to offer explanations or apologies, but no word seemed adequate for the magnitude of her past cruelty. I have spent the last hour observing this school, Kelechi continued, his voice now carrying the authority of his office. And I see that nothing has changed. You still judge students by their families' bank accounts rather than their potential. You still perpetuate the same discriminatory practices that nearly destroyed my future. He walked back to his chair and sat down, pulling out a folder from his briefcase. I have received 17 formal complaints about this school in the past 6 months. 17 separate instances of talented students being discouraged, marginalized, or outrightly discriminated against because of their socio-economic status. Every single complaint mentions your name, Mrs. Okafor. She stared at the folder as if it contained a death sentence. Your Excellency, please, I can change. I can do better. I never realized. You never realized because you never cared to realize, Kelechi interrupted. For 10 years, you have held a position of influence over young minds, and you have used that position to perpetuate inequality rather than challenge it. He opened the folder and pulled out an official document. This is your termination notice, effective immediately. You are being dismissed from your position as principal of Bright Future Secondary School for discriminatory practices, violation of educational equity policies, and conduct unbecoming of an educator. Mrs. Okafor's world collapsed in an instant. The security, the prestige, the power she had wielded for so long was being stripped away by the very person she had tried to crush years earlier. Please, she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. I have a family. I have a reputation. This will destroy everything I have worked for. Kelechi looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice contained both justice and sadness. Mrs. Okafor, do you remember what you told me when I asked what would happen if our positions were reversed? You said it was impossible, that someone like me could never determine your fate. Well, here we are. He stood up, preparing to leave. But unlike you, I don't take pleasure in another person's downfall. This decision isn't about revenge. It is about protecting the students who deserve better than the treatment I received in your classroom. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back one final time. You once asked me what a boy like me could possibly know about education's power to transform lives. Today, you have your answer. 6 months later, Bright Future Secondary School had been transformed under new leadership. The discriminatory seating arrangements were abolished, merit-based recognition was implemented, and a special scholarship program was established for academically gifted students from low-income families. Mrs. Victoria Okafor never worked in education again. Determination and its circumstances became widely known throughout Lagos' educational community. Effectively ending her career, she was forced to sell her expensive car and move to a smaller house. Experiencing for the first time in her life the financial uncertainty she had once mocked in others. But the most profound change was in the students themselves. Children who had been relegated to the back corners of classrooms found their voices. Brilliant minds that had been dismissed because of their family circumstances began to flourish. The school's academic performance improved dramatically as true merit, rather than social status, became the measure of success. Dr. Kelechi Anozie continued his work as Minister of Education, implementing nationwide reforms that ensured his experience would never be repeated in Nigerian schools. His mother's dream that no child would face what her son had endured was slowly become reality across the country. On the first anniversary of his visit to Bright Future Secondary School, Kelechi received a letter from a student there, a young girl from a poor family who had been encouraged to pursue her dreams of becoming a doctor. Her handwriting was neat and determined, her words filled with hope and gratitude. Dear Mr. Minister, she wrote, thank you for showing us that where we come from doesn't determine where we're going. Because of you, I know that my dreams are possible. Kelechi smiled as he read those words, hearing an echo of his own voice from years past, when a 12-year-old boy had asked a cruel teacher, what if you are wrong? He had proven she was wrong, and in doing so, He had opened doors for countless other children to prove that intelligence, determination, and dreams cannot be measured by the clothes you wear or the house you live in. The boy who was once told he would amount to nothing had become the man who ensured that every child will have the chance to amount to everything they could imagine. Justice, it turned out, was not about revenge. It was about making sure that cruelty could never again masquerade as education, and that every brilliant mind would have the opportunity to shine, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. Thank you for watching Raw Tales Africa. If this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who believe in the power of education to transform lives. Remember, your current circumstances are not your final destination. Keep dreaming, keep working, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong in the room where your dreams can come true.